Welcome to the Creator's Journey with the Halfling and Spaceman. We love talking to creators about their journeys and how they became the creators that they are. And we are happy to have a chat with Matthew Kresal. And he is a man of many things. He does many things. He's an author, a critic, podcaster with various topics, including UFO, Civil War, Civil War history, and all that. And he's also written and discussed those topics. And along with that, the BBC's Doctor Who, which that's very cool because we're Doctor Who fans. So we want to welcome Matthew to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to join us this afternoon. Obviously, with all that going on, you're pretty busy, so we appreciate you taking the time.
Another true polymath, Atheling. Another true polymath.
Exactly. Yeah, they're coming out of the woodworks. Well, Matthew, we're going to go ahead and get the ball rolling. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, your formative years, and more importantly, what was it that sparked all that creativity? What got you started doing all that?
Oh, I sort of like to joke that I came out of the womb a nerd. I like to think it was because I was born in Huntsville, Alabama, which for people who don't know is home of the Marshall Space Flight Center and the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. That there's a lot of NASA around here. There's a lot of geek culture around here, though I didn't go to my first convention until I was like 19 or 20. But all of that was around, and my dad was a little bit of a fan of the original Star Trek, less so of things like TNG and whatnot, but I remember growing up and watching that with him on reruns. And I just was very interested in space, and I like to also say that my life is basically a giant Venn diagram, where everything kind of overlaps, and where I keep finding the little connections between this and that, and where they intersect is where I usually end up being creative.
Very cool. That's interesting because you you s- you spread your creativity over different areas, and we can cover this a little bit later, but I'll be kind of curious as to how you draw some of those connections because it seems like not everything. I mean, some of the connections are not obvious to me, so probably had to dig kind of deep for some of that stuff. Um, all right, Mr. Spaceman, I believe you're up.
Time for the spaceman. So, Matthew, we like to understand people's past and how it got them to their present. So, with that in mind, when you were young, what kind of things did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh boy. Till about third grade, and maybe actually even after that, I really wanted to be an astronaut. And that's entirely the kind of growing around, well, with space stuff in the background. And, watching science fiction stuff and whatnot. And, the idea of going to space was hugely appealing. It still is. Who am I kidding? Um, but I discovered somewhere around late middle school and high school that I could not math to save my life. I bombed high school algebra, not once but 3 times before I finally passed it. So math is not my strong suit. But I discovered around third grade, I had a teacher who very much knew I had a lot of imagination and was encouraging me to explore that, and knew I had a lot of interest in things like space and whatnot. So I started writing at a young age. And that kind of led me to deciding, maybe I could be a professional writer. And it took me a very long time to get to the point where I had my first story published. But that was kind of where it started. But I would, when the Dear Moon project was going on a while back, where there was a Japanese billionaire who was recruiting people. He wanted to send artists and writers and stuff into space. I applied for that. I would still love to go into space at some point if the opportunity arose. I don't have a master's degree in anything, so NASA's not going to be recruiting me unless they're looking for writers all of a sudden. But I really wanted to be an astronaut, and somewhere in the back of my mind, even at age 37, I still want to be an astronaut.
Well, I always say you're never too old. You know, just keep the dream alive, and maybe the opportunity will come up sometime.
Well,
We can only hope.
and I may never go to outer space, but I'm already the spaceman. So,
Yeah, you've already earned that title.
yes, but only for being spacey.
I'm not even going to comment on that one. Well, what inspires the various topics that you write about? This is kind of where I wanted to get into this, how you draw some of those connections.
The great thing about something like Doctor Who, for example, is that it's a time travel and a science fiction series. It does a little bit of everything. It's a show that can do almost anything and everything, except maybe musicals, but that's a whole nother conversation and a whole nother podcast. But Doctor Who touches on a lot of that. You know, it's done episodes about space. It's done things about, NASA in the 60s, for example. So it was something that really appealed to me and found the connections there. When I did my book, God, it was been about 6 years ago since it was published, and even longer ago than that since I started writing it, on the Dark Skies TV series from the 90s. The whole reason that book happened was that it was back to that Venn diagram thing of things I was interested in. It was the UFO phenomenon and the mythology around that. There were episodes on the space race. There was the JFK assassination. It was mid-20th century American history, and I'm a big Cold War history nerd, and that's like, my era that I'm really interested in. And when I got done rewatching that series in full, I said, how has somebody never written a book about this? Because there's so much to unpack. And I got lucky enough that after a couple of years in different publishers, I found somebody who was crazy enough to let me do that.
And how long did it take you to write the book?
A couple of years, probably cumulatively. And in the middle of researching that, I went off and wrote my novel, while I was doing the research, and then sat down and did the writing for it, and sent it off and had to wait on edits to come in, and then spent another, year on and off editing that. And then from there, had a finalized book, and I signed off on the final draft of that in December of 2019, and the book came out in April of 2020.
Oh, okay. Well, I have to apologize because in the introduction, I sort of messed up because I said Civil War and it was Cold War. So I apologize.
Well, I am a Civil War buff. I am a man from the South of a certain age, so I have an interest in the Civil War.
Yeah. But that was kind of where I was thinking, how do you get a connection between that and like the UFO phenomena and stuff?
Look, I've met people who were in the SCA who did Civil War, Rev War, and even World War II reenacting, who went to sci-fi cons and wrote science fiction. People who have nerdy interests tend to have nerdy interest.
Yes.
Wide and varied. That's us.
I think whenever I have to put together a biography for somewhere, as you inevitably do as a writer or a podcaster, I like to describe myself as having many and varying interests. And it's finding the connections between those things that's often fun.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to ask a question that's not on our prepared questions.
You can't.
I can. I can do whatever I want because I'm the spaceman. How do you feel about the works of Eric von Daniken and the whole ancient astronauts things? I've been an ancient astronauts enthusiast since not necessarily the History Channel show, but the whole concept since I was a kid. And as a person who's into UFOs, what do you think about, the chariots of the gods and things like that?
Having read the actual book, because it turned out one of the public libraries where I grew up at had the copy of the book there. It was an original 1969 hardcover, which is odd to have in a public library in Alabama, but that's neither here nor there. It's a fascinating idea. And that's what it is, I think, more than anything. It's a fascinating idea. I think the evidence to support it is pretty flimsy. Yes, there's lots of ancient mysteries. There's lots of things that we don't understand about ancient cultures, or indeed how things were built. The pyramids are a great example of that. I know that there's open debates about the age of the Sphinx that have been ongoing for my lifetime. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, little gray men from Zeta Reticuli showed up and basically handed the blueprints to people, or indeed started doing cloning, or this, that, and the other, some of the more wild ideas that are out there. I will say that the idea that they may have came here, that they may have visited, they may have left some kind of an impact, is not an outrageous idea. Even Carl Sagan in the early 1960s did this NASA report that was one of the foundations for SETI, where he basically said, given how long human history has been, there's a chance that somebody's been here before, and they've left an imprint behind. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they did, or that they built the pyramids, or that they were mining for gold, or anything along those lines. But it's a great story idea. The problem, if I may say, is that when you move from people believing a science fiction idea into something that really happened.
Right. Well, that transitioned us to the actual question that I was supposed to ask according to the halfling. You've had stories in several different anthologies, and we're talking about stories now.
Yeah.
And you've also released a novel, Our Man on the Hill. So, do you have any plans for your second novel?
I knew this question was coming. And the ironic thinking about all this is that I have been trying to do a second novel since before that one was published, because I wrote that one around 2017, 2018. And while I was trying to decide what to do with it, and eventually found a publisher, I actually went off and did, because NaNoWriMo used to be a thing, and people who don't know what NaNoWriMo is things, it used to be National Novel Writing Month. It happened every November, and the idea was that you sat down and wrote 1,667 words a day for 30 days. You had a 50,000 word first draft for something. And I used that as both a learning opportunity, but also as a chance to try and do first drafts of things. And what's happened over time, before NaNoWriMo shot itself in the foot, for lack of a better way of putting it, was that I did about 3 or 4 that I thought, oh yeah, this could be a second novel. 2 of which ended up being situations where I discovered in the process of writing it that this was not a 50,000 word novel idea. It was a great short story idea, but it didn't work as a full-length novel. And at least one of those I subsequently edited and put into a short story that's been published in one of those mini anthologies I've been in. One of the other novel ideas I had was just a weird cosmic coincidence. I wrote the last lines of the novel before I almost did anything else with it. And by chance, I was reading somebody else's book, and their ending was almost word for word mine. And there's no way that anybody could have, gotten it to that writer and said, hey, this is a perfect ending for your book. But it was just very weird. And I haven't figured out a new ending since then. And the other one I'm working on at the moment, as it turns out. But I'm sort of stalled partway through, so I'm just trying to get the momentum to get myself going again.
Well, that's interesting that she found that, that it almost matched, as you said, word for word. Did you ever think, was somebody been looking at my stuff or anything like that?
Well, I'd only shared that bit with about 2 different people, and I'm pretty sure neither one of them knows that author. So it was just, to be fair, we were dealing with vaguely related premises, which was the idea of first contact situations in the 1970s. So, and even though theirs was wildly different from mine, and theirs involved the ocean and mine involved outer space, and the Apollo missions, we hit upon something very, very similar.
Okay. I can see how two paths can get to the same destination.
Yeah.
You know.
I think it happens when everybody's sort of going to the same creative well and you're drawing from it, that occasionally, the infinite monkeys are going to write Hamlet.
Right. Well, you are a podcaster. You've written a novel. You've done short stories. What is the thing you enjoy the most?
Probably writing. Probably short stories, to be honest. They're fun to do. They take a lot less time, and not necessarily less energy, because you have to put as much thought into a short story as you do into a novel, at least from my experience. But it's something that you can do if you go from idea to idea to idea. And I'm somebody with more ideas than I'll probably ever be able to do anything with. And that can be frustrating at times because, everybody's got deadlines, and you find out that the two anthologies you want to contribute to both have the same deadline on the same day, and you have to decide which one you want to do. But I love writing, and I love short stories. I enjoyed the novel writing process. When I did the Our Man on the Hill first draft, that was a lot of fun to do. But novels are a huge commitment, and they're a lot of time. And it's something that you better have a good idea going into it. You better know that it's going to last 50 to 100,000 words. And it doesn't always, sadly. And podcasting's fun. I love getting on here and talking with nerds about anything and everything. There's a Doctor Who podcast I do on a regular basis that I really enjoy doing, and it's just me and a couple of my pals that I've met at the Chicago TARDIS convention over the years, and we get together and we talk about a random Doctor Who story. That's a lot of fun to do. What's less fun is when I used to run my own podcast many years ago, and the process of not only recording but editing and also listening to the thing that we would talk about is just less fun. And when you're the only person doing it, it is there's a line for the musical Evita I often quote on creative things, which is that it's hard to keep momentum when it's you that you are following. And that's the hardest thing to do as a creative person, especially when you don't have a deadline to get something out on a regular basis.
Oh, dude, don't I know it? Well, I've hold on just a second. I got to give you a chest thump for the whole having so many things you want to do thing, because I know exactly what you're talking about. So 1 second. Man after my own heart.
He is the idea man.
I am the idea man.
He'll get out of the shower and he'll say, "I just came up with a great idea." And I'm like, "Stop!
We
No
have enough
more.
projects already."
No more."
Right.
Because in addition to to our regular Halfling Spaceman podcast, I'm going to be starting my own YouTube channel called the Halflings Book Nook. And that's going to be basically book commentary channel, where I read a book and then I talk about the things that I liked about it. I'm not going to talk about a book that I didn't enjoy, because I don't want to bring any writer down.
Yeah, you're sure that book's a book for somebody?
Yeah. I mean, if I say something negative, somebody's still going to enjoy the book. I don't want to put them, keep them from trying to read it. But the other one is Spaceman's got his applied game mastery project, which is also YouTube, and that is a very long-term, multi-phase project where he's trying to discover what makes a legendary game master. And that's between those three things, that's enough.
Well, Janet, this is Matthew's time to shine.
Yeah.
We'll have our day, sir.
I know. I'm just saying that you said you know all about that. Anyway.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a good transition point, because we're now coming to the point where we want to understand your process. One of the things that we encourage creators to do is to learn from other creators. Those are your best resources.
Mm.
So, could you talk us through your creative process, the way you conceptualize things and then develop them and then create the final work? Because it varies for everyone.
Yeah, and it varies from project to project, for that matter. I don't know if I have a set process per se. I've had times where I've had the idea fully formed, and being able to run into it and figure out how to put that on the page. Those are the ones that are fun when you know exactly what you wanted to do. There's other ones where I've had a beginning or an ending, or I've had both, and it's figuring out that massive hinterland between the two, and you have to figure out how do you fill that in. In other cases, like with the Dark Skies book and like with some of my nonfiction writing, you have to start with an outline. You basically start with this is this thing I want to write about. And from there, you have to figure out, well, how do you break that down chapter by chapter? And then you have to submit it to a publisher. And the publisher gets back to you and says, well, what if you did this instead of that? Or what if you added this bit here? And, there's back and forth. I don't want to say negotiation, because that's probably putting too fine a word on it. But you go back and forth between it. And then you actually get to the writing process. In the case of nonfiction, that's a lot of reading and writing and listening and soaking up a lot of information. I've always been, even as a kid, this kind of very inquisitive person. I always wanted to know anything I can about anything that really interested me. So that was a lot of soaking up information, and then you figure out, well, how do I put this into a form that's also informative to people who haven't just read 30 books and watched umpteen documentaries and listened to podcasts and everything else. That's a fun challenge. Well, sometimes it's fun, so sometimes it's not. And figuring out how that is. And then again, you go with an editor, and editors can sometimes be great at coming back to you and going, I don't understand this. I clearly, you mean something by this, but it's the places where you discover, where you discover the so-called curse of knowledge, where you know so much that you have to figure out, how do I import this to somebody else? And editing is like the bane of my existence. I hate editing with a passion not known to modern man since the French Revolution. I love the writing process. Editing is either something you can do fairly quickly and it's there, or it could be a long and drawn out. And you never know which one it's going to be. But the final product is what matters. And I take the most joy, I suppose, out of having this finished thing that's out there with my name on it that people can read and enjoy and hopefully learn from, whether it's a nonfiction piece or some of my alternate history stuff I've written, because people can look at how history didn't go to understand how history did go.
Well, that's a very true point. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're right. Um, so I guess that kind of covers the what if scenario, or the alternate history. Kind of people read those stories, and then they start comparing how
Yeah.
how things really happen versus what this writer put in their book.
Yeah. And history often turns on a dime. One of my favorite things to tell people about is that during the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, we came close to nuclear war not one, but 3 times in one Saturday. And if any one of those 3 events had gone just a little bit differently, we probably wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's. I guess that can be a little daunting to think about. One little moment in time could change history.
Yeah. It can be daunting, but that's also the fun of creativity. And then you, as a history nerd who's now writing an alternate history story, have to figure out, well, if that changes that, what else could be changed by that? And that's fun to do. But you also have to make it plausible. It's the problem with a lot of the, Nazis win World War II situation. That people come up with scenarios that are not realistic at all. And somebody goes, well, I'm going to start with a premise and that's what I'm going to do. And once you actually start doing the nitty and gritty of it and taking it apart, it doesn't always work. But, that's part of the fun of the process. But what works for me might not work for somebody else, and vice versa.
Well, I'd like to change gears for a minute and talk about your work on podcasts, and when you actually hosted your own podcast. Tell us a little bit about the various topics. I know you mentioned one was the Doctor Who podcast that you're on a semi-regular basis or whatever. So what else have you what other podcasts have you been on that you've contributed to, or what did you host? What podcast did you host?
Well, the show that I hosted was called Stories from the Vortex. And there's a company in the UK called Big Finish Productions, and they've had since 1999 the license to do the licensed audio drama based off of Doctor Who. So they've gotten a lot of the original cast back together. They've done some recastings as time's gone on, and they produce new stories based on the show, not recreating the old show, but telling new stories. Basically, the Doctor Who equivalent of Sherlock Holmes pastiches. And we did an entire show talking about various ones of those. That ran from late 2013 till kind of mid 2017. I think we did 47 episodes. We didn't quite make it to 50. But that was fun to do, and that came out of wanting to talk about those stories, but nobody around me here in Alabama had any idea what I was talking about. So I found some people through another podcast I popped off and on for a while, called the 20 Megabyte Doctor Who podcast, which is now on hiatus. It ran for years and years, and I'm grateful to Adam Pearson, who was the founder and host of that, because he got me my start in podcasting. And that was another one where they would get together for a couple hours on a Sunday, and they would just talk about an episode of Doctor Who, and they did a big thing they called The Journey, where they started with an unearthly child, and they worked their entire way through the show. So that was fun to pop on to from time to time for years. I popped up on different shows talking about different things. There was one called Dead Hand Radio that I was on 2 or 3 times, which I talked about UFOs. I talked about my novel, and which centered around Joe McCarthy and the Red Scare. I was on there promoting the Dark Skies book, and I even ended up on there talking about the Titanic, of all things, because I'm a big Titanic nerd. So I did that. And when Dark Skies book came out, I ended up doing a lot of UFO podcasts in a very short period of time, because it was 2020 and everybody was at home and the book was out, and it was a great way to promote the book. So I did a lot of UFO talking about for a while. And I've popped up on the odd Doctor Who podcast here and there. I should have put a list together before I came on. But I feel pretty confident if you pop my name into Google, you'll probably find not just a lot of my writing, but you'll probably find a lot of my podcast appearances.
Well, I want to give the props out to Big Finish Productions, not only for giving Paul McGann the chance to be the doctor he was meant to be, but also for bringing Space 1999 back. So let's hear it for Big Finish Studios.
Hear, hear.
All right. So now it's time. Dum, dum, dum. It's time for the most important part of the show, where we learn more about where we can find you and where our audience can discover everything about Matthew.
Oh, I'm on Facebook and Blue Sky. My handle is Kresal Writes, which is my last name, Kresal Writes, Writes. You can find me on Facebook and Blue Sky under those. A lot of what I've written is available on Amazon, either through Kindle or on physical. If you want the Dark Skies book and you want to learn more about that short-lived 1990s conspiracy theory fueled TV series, that's available from the wonderful folks at Obverse Books over in the UK. I believe you can also order that on Lulu, as through print on demand, if you don't want to pay for international shipping.
Okay, we'll make sure we get that in the show notes.
Absolutely. Are any of your short stories or your novel, is your novel on audiobook by chance?
It is not. My publisher wasn't, and I don't know if they really still are, into audiobook. I would love for it to be an audiobook. As somebody who's an avid audiobook listener, I'd love for somebody to go and take some of my stuff and make it into audiobook format. But sadly, not at the moment. But it's something I should probably look into.
Yeah, we're big audiobook people.
Their audiobooks are great when you're hauling your way to a convention every
Yeah.
other weekend.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great way to spend time, you know. So okay, well, if that happens, let us know.
Absolutely.
Well, we want to thank you for taking the time again to join us today. We have had a lot of fun chatting with you and getting to know you and all the creative things that you do.
Oh, thank you. This has been a pleasure.
And we want to thank our audience for joining us today and hope you've been inspired and entertained by today's guest, Matthew Kresal. And this is the Spaceman, as always, for the Halfling and the Spaceman podcast. Over and out.